For most Americans, these are the sights and sounds of a faraway African nation they may never have heard of before. But for one St. Louisan, they're the sights and sounds of her ancestral home. This is Malawi, population about 12 million. It's located in Southeast Africa and is about the size of the state of Pennsylvania. A century ago, one of Malawi's native daughters sailed away to a new life in the United States. It would be several decades before her American descendants and African relatives would find each other.
Right now, I'm the only person I know, and probably I'm the only person you know, that can go to Africa and knock on the door and say, "I'm home."
Margaret Durham of Florissant says she was about 8 years old when her maternal grandmother first told her about that ancestor. She was Durham's great-grandmother, late cello Rachel Chilembwe.
She had a picture of her mother on her wall in her bedroom, and she would always point to the picture and say that you are Yao.
In the early 1900s, Rachel Chilembwe, daughter of the chief of the Yao tribe, married Reverend Landon Cheek. He was a black American who helped establish a Baptist mission in what was then the British colony of Nyasaland.
The Foreign Mission Board of the National Baptist Convention is the organ that sent my great-grandfather to Africa in the first place. He was born in 1871, and he lived to 1964. So he would come to St. Louis and visit my mom, who was his granddaughter, and so we kind of were aware of him, but we didn't know he was an African missionary. We just were not aware of those things.
Margaret Durham's interest in her family tree wasn't piqued until the late 1970s, after a Malawi cousin tracked her down.
The African that came to America, he knew that story about Cheek, about this American Negro that came to Africa and married an African. And, well, the African was his aunt. And so he said it was always his dream to come to America and find his aunt and find Cheek and unite with them.
Through her research, Durham learned her great-grandfather, Landon Cheek, wrote a series of letters from Africa about his experiences. They were published in the Richmond Planet, a black-owned newspaper in Virginia.
He left a wonderful paper trail. He went to Natchez Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi, which is now Jackson State College. So I was able to go there for his college records, and I was able to go to the Foreign Mission Board, and he wrote not hundreds, but just a whole lot of letters back to the Foreign Mission Board, just explaining to them what was going on.
Landon Cheek returned to the U.S. in 1907, taking with him his wife Rachel and their children, Landon Jr. and Margaret's grandmother, Ella May.
This is their record from Ellis Island. I just recently started looking at Ellis Island because I just never thought to look there. I said, he won't be there. This is my great-grandmother Rachel's death certificate. And as you can see, this is her name, and she died of consumption in 1917. But this is what is so wonderful, that he lists her place of birth, and he lists the name of her father, and he lists the name of her mother.
You know, it's not everybody who has an ancestor on currency.
I'm so proud.
But perhaps the most exciting discovery Margaret Durham made was her great-great-uncle, revolutionary John Chilembwe. Under the sponsorship of British and black American clergy, Chilembwe went to the U.S. to study theology. He returned to Nyasaland and established the colony's only African-run mission with Landon Cheek's help.
By 1913, he'd built a fine brick church like those he'd seen in Lynchburg. He was an African chief and an American pastor. And by 1914, it was said that he was plotting a rising.
This BBC documentary details Chilembwe's anger over the exploitation of Africans by the British and the rebellion he led against white landowners in 1915. In addition to the documentary, Durham discovered books written about Chilembwe and the uprising. They include Independent African by Scottish professor John Shepperson.
What's so wonderful about this book, he not only gives John Chilimwe's history, he gives my history.
She was even inspired to write a book of her own. It's entitled The Bones of My Ancestors.
I got the title for my book from my cousin, Margaret Durham, because when I was going to go to Africa to see them, he had written me a letter and he says, "Come home, sister, and we'll walk through the bones of our ancestors."
The religious work begun by Landon Cheek and John Chilimwe some 100 years ago continues to this day. In fact, the cousin who first visited Margaret in 1977, Reverend Macfor Chipuliko, is president of the African National Baptist Convention in Malawi. And in 2002, Reverend Chipuliko received a proclamation from Malawi's president declaring January 15th John Chilimwe Day, a national holiday. What has this whole experience done for your personal sense of identity?
I don't even know if I can express how proud it makes me feel. Even if I hadn't, if John Chilimwe wasn't a national hero, if he wasn't on the currency, just the love and the affiliation with my own African relatives has been such an inspiration to me.
Durham even traced Landon Cheek's ancestors back to the American plantation where they worked as slaves. But that's another story.
Malawi means land of the rising sun, so that's...
To encourage other African Americans to discover their roots, Margaret Durham conducts continuing education classes in genealogy. It's often a complicated and daunting process, but Durham says if she can do it, so can other people.
My advice is to never give up. And if you don't find information on one family line, just go to another one. Somewhere in the family, you're going to find somebody.
Is the effort worth it?
Oh my goodness, yes. Just look at all the things that I have.